Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 4148. Today's date is June 9, 2026. It's been almost like a night at 10:06 p.m. All right, let's just jump into the question. Let's go. All right. So, question is, will AI bias affect user? AI bias. That's a really good question. All right. Yeah. Okay, first of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? I wanted to build an application called My Artifact. What exactly is this application? When you write the diary every single day, you cannot able to be write the diary the way that you wanted to. The reason is that you need a pen, you need a paper. Sorry. Okay, start over. All right. Uh, I wanted to build an app called My Artifact. Like, what exactly is this application? When you write the diary every single day, you cannot able to be write the diary the way that you wanted to. The reason is that your thought process are actually much more faster than your writing speed. Your writing speed actually slow is because of you need a pen, you need a paper, you need a convenience, and even after that you need to put lot of amount of effort to kind of like a print your thoughts. So because of it kind of like take that much amount of effort, that's why very less amount of people are writing diary. Almost no one actually write the diary. What if instead of writing a diary, what if we could record a diary, like audio record a diary? The stuff that you are kind of like listening right now, this is my audio diary. I called it My Artifact. My Artifact episode number 4148. I am doing this thing for past 11 years. I am doing this thing every single day because of writing a diary is a self-reflection process. So as recording a diary, so as a recording artifact is a self-reflection process. It adds so much amount of value inside of me. The person that I became today, the person that I will become tomorrow, it is all because of artifact. The amount of value it add inside of me, I want to share this value to the people. How do I supposed to do that? By building an application. My application is somewhat something like a YouTube platform. In like a YouTube, you actually upload your video, other people kind of like sees your video. Same thing, you actually upload your artifact on artifact platform. You actually record your artifact, upload your artifact in artifact platform. Other people kind of like listen your artifact in artifact platform. Okay, there is only one catch is that your name is always kept hidden. Like my real name is Saurabh Avsare, but my artifact handle name would be Prozac 1943 or something else. Before I wanted to build this application, I wanted to aware of all the possible consequences, specifically worst possible consequences. I went to ChatGPT, tell my idea, tell him that he suggests me hundreds of possible consequences in question format. ChatGPT kind of like suggests me hundreds of possible questions. This is one of those questions. Now, regarding about the question says that will AI bias affect the user? Okay, first of all, what is exactly AI bias? First of all, let's just understand bias. What is actually meaning of bias? A bias means like that a kind of like a particular judgmental system which define which is better than which. Like a okay, let me kind of like somebody tell you something like that. Okay, so let's just say you are a kind of like a like like basically is this thing, take example is this thing that key you are a kind of like a something that key like a doing a test probably. Okay, yeah, something like that. The doing a test means like that key, let's just say a kind of like a somebody is this thing that key you are not a teacher by the way, like you are a kind of like a invigilator. Okay, what is exactly invigilator? The people who are kind of like a something when the people, when students are kind of like doing the test, okay, the invigilator are kind of like invigilate everything that cheating is not actually happened, try to make sure that everyone is kind of like writing their own paper and things and that and kind of like whatever the kind of like a protocol required for exam they should supposed to follow and kind of like do not interfere with things and try to make sure that make the peace and calm and everyone kind of like assembly solve their exam, solve their kind of like a paper and things and that, right? So this is what invigilator. invigilator, I'm sorry about the proper pronunciation. Okay, so you are the invigilator, and basically you found a kind of like a, let's just say your brother, a kind of like little brother, is a kind of like doing an exam. Okay, now your little brother is not really kind of like that good, okay, in exam. So you kind of like give him little bit of kind of like cheat, like just kind of like a slightly just, yeah, because you are kind of like a controlling that room. So basically this is thing that key, it's kind of like a thing. So you are kind of like doing a bias. Okay, you are kind of like doing a bias. You are kind of like simply giving such opportunity to such a person who will kind of like add value, and other people will not gonna get that opportunity, or not other people will not gonna get that kind of like a value and things and that and that. Okay, yeah, kind of like a somewhat something like a bias. Like, do you understand biasness? Okay, yeah, like basically is this thing that he kind of like the person that I might gonna know, or person which kind of like a things, then kind of like I would do kind of like a bias and things and that and that. Okay, yeah, this would be kind of like a somebody like a, like it's not kind of like a happen, it actually happened everywhere. Okay, yeah, how is actually happen everywhere? Well, okay, let's just say a kind of like that ki, you are a doctor, okay, and kind of like that ki suddenly you realize that ki, your relative is kind of like a, like your relatives are kind of like struggling for blood, like they kind of like had operation and things and that. Okay, yeah, and they need a kind of like a blood, let's just say a kind of like a something that O positive. Okay, yeah, now you are kind of like a doctor. Okay, so basically this thing, you went to blood bank in your hospital, and kind of like a say, like there is only one bag or one kind of like a O positive blood is actually available. And basically you are kind of like a say, this blood bag is kind of like a for my relative, so kind of like I will kind of like a prevent that bag, so that kind of like my relative will kind of like get it. Even if kind of like some people who are kind of like came early to kind of like register that they want O positive blood, but because of I am the doctor and I have kind of like a connections and network and things and that, I would gonna say blood bank to the people, dude, like basically this is the kind of like a blood I really required for my relatives, so basically do not give that thing. So that is called kind of like a biasness. Okay, yeah, it actually kind of like happen everywhere too. Now if you still not understand, I'm gonna kind of like tell you another example. Okay, yeah, let's just say you are a kind of like a something, a kind of like a film producer, and the director is a kind of like a came to you, and director kind of like a telling a story. Now you like the story and you want to kind of like a finance his movie. Okay, yeah, so basically you kind of like a, you kind of like a put the request to the director, say that ki, your story is really good, really great, I will kind of like a finance your movie, but only one condition, you have to kind of like a somebody launch my son, or maybe kind of like a cast my son as a kind of like a lead role or things and that. Okay, yeah, dude, so do you understand? It's a kind of like a biasness and things and that. It's not biasness but nepotism probably, but do you understand things? This is what kind of like a somewhat something biasness. Okay, now, and a human point of perspective, we have to understand everything, like whatever the emotion that we do, stress, angry or things and that, all the emotion, happiness, every emotion are based on two things. What is actually two things? Right and wrong. Okay, because we are humans, we clearly understand what is right and what is wrong for us. Okay, and because of it kind of like a very easy, that's why we could kind of like generate that many emotions and things and that. If you're not really understanding the context, okay, I'm kind of like giving you another example. Okay, your friend has a kind of like a birthday. Okay, yeah, and you kind of like somebody decided that I wanted to give a birthday party to my friend and things and that. You kind of like did a kind of like a book a lodge, or kind of like you do the decoration, cakes and things and that, and your friend came, the friend of friend came, all the people will came, and the people are kind of like celebrating and things and that. You are happy, your friend are happy, the person who has a birthday who is also really happy, everyone are really happy, so this is kind of like a really happy moment. Okay, so okay, Now, one thing actually happened. I'm gonna tell you story, and then after that, I'm gonna tell you what is really right and wrong. Okay. Now, basically, you kind of like assembly throw the party to your friend for you spend the money and things and that and that. You invited a lot of people, and everyone kind of like enjoy things. The DJs are blasting. Everyone kind of like doing something really cool and stuff like that. Okay. The person who has a kind of like a birthday, who has a kind of like a somebody kind of like a came to you and say, what the fuck that you did? Like who asked you to kind of like a throw the party for me? Like basically I didn't really ask you to kind of like a throw the party for me for my birthday and things and that and that. Like basically, do you realize that how I'm being through fucking shit? Like basically what is actually happened that a particular person who has a kind of like a birthday, who kind of like a saying this thing to his friend, like basically to you, that ki why you kind of like a throw the party and things and that, and basically he's so angry and so pissed off and things and that. Okay, yeah. So in this particular scenario, what is actually good thing? Good thing is that ki you throw the party because of he is your friend or she is your friend, whatever is your friend. So you are kind of like a simply that ki you wanted to make the moment little bit of happier and things and that and that. And as also that particular person, like because you are kind of like throwing a party to a such a person that kind of like a value you, maybe that particular person, maybe your girlfriend or wife or whatever it is. Okay, it kind of like a value. So that's why you kind of like a represent that how much you care and how much you kind of like a things and that and that. So that's why you throw the party things and that. As also in the party, all of people are happy, you are happy, everyone are kind of like really happy. Okay, so this is a good thing. Like, do you understand? This is a good thing, na? Okay, like it's not a wrong thing. It's a good thing. Okay, now what's exactly wrong thing actually happened? The wrong thing actually happened that key, even after you put all the effort, you kind of like a book the lodge, everyone kind of like invited, the DJs are blasting, the kind of like a decoration and kind of like a food and everything, you prepare everything and that and that and that. But even after that, you're kind of like a close friend or whoever the friend who has a kind of like a birthday, kind of like a yelling at you, kind of like a say this thing that ki, why did you do this and that and that and that. Now because of this thing, this is a wrong thing. Like, now do you understand? Now from this scenario, do you understand what is really right thing? Okay, the kind of like a from your point of story is the right thing. The whatever the kind of like consequences happened, the particular person kind of like a yelling at you, this is the wrong thing actually happened. So we are humans and we are kind of like easy to understand what is actually right thing and what is actually wrong thing. Okay, yeah. Now, okay, like I understand, you understand, everyone understand, yeah. Like we are like a basically I wanted to kind of like a simply wanted to explain you from basic point of perspective that what is exactly the bias and what is actually true, what is actually false, what is actually good and what is actually bad. Okay, yeah. Because we are humans and we are kind of like a easy to understand that stuff very easily. Okay, yeah. Did you understand that? Okay, if you understand, I'm gonna kind of like give you another example. Okay, yeah. Not regarding about kind of like a somewhat something that key, like do you understand what is actually right and wrong? Okay, yeah. Now what is actually right and wrong is kind of like a relative, like a basically the definition of right and the definition of wrong is a relative means it change according to the time. Example, let's just say 1,000 years ago, a kind of like a somebody, you are kind of like a somebody is this thing that key, like you need a food, you are kind of like a really starving and things and that and that and that. Okay, yeah. Now what should you supposed to do? Like basically is this thing, I'm gonna steal the money. So you are stealing the money for food and things. Now basically tell me, this act is good or bad? Most of people might gonna say it is a good act because of that key, we are kind of like stealing the money for food. So basically the like basically is this thing that key, I know the kind of like a the stuff that I'm doing is a kind of like a really wrong, but in that situation, in that period of time, thousands of years ago, this might be considered as a right thing. Because of that key, stealing money is a kind of like a bit more common. But if you are kind of like a do this thing right now, would you kind of like simply steal the money for food? Yeah, still people will gonna do this thing. Okay, but it's not really case, by the way. People might gonna feel guilty. Still, stealing of food, stealing of money is a kind of like a very lame example. Take another example. Let's just say that key you want a food. Okay, yeah, and particular person who is kind of like not giving you that food. So what should you supposed to do? You have a knife, you just stab the knife to that particular person and kill that man. Okay, and now thousands of years ago, this might consider as a kind of like a normal kind of like that, because thousands of years ago, killing a people is a kind of like a something is common. Like, yeah, it's been like a people are kind of like a die and things and that and that, and at that time there is no kind of like a justice. Like if you are kind of like a living in kind of like a some metropolitan city like a Vatican City, Greece, or maybe kind of like a somebody that key Baghdad, or maybe whatever. Okay, in that situation, might be things might gonna happen something wrong, but like a like basically in other kind of like a things where kind of like a city is not really that much evolved and things, and there is no kind of like a network, there is no kind of like that many connection, there is no not that many kind of like a people and things and that, then people might gonna consider that's very common. People actually die because thousands of years ago people are kind of like a kill each other, and it was kind of like a very much common in that period of time. Okay, yeah. So understand now, like basically thousands of years ago, killing a people is a considered as a kind of like a very common, or considered as a kind of like a, it's not kind of like a something the wrong, but it's not either kind of like a something good. It's a kind of like a somewhat something that key, like basically is this thing that key I need money, sorry, I need a food, so I kind of like kill that particular person, things and that and that. Would you do this thing today? Definitely not. I would not gonna kill any particular guy for food. Definitely not. I would not gonna do that. Ask anyone. Okay, on this planet, ask anyone. Do you kind of like kill somebody for food? Definitely not. Okay, yeah. But thousands of years ago, it will kind of like most of people gonna say, yeah, I will kind of like kill for the food. Yeah, why not? Okay, so this is what it is. Okay, yeah. So understand now the right, what is actually right and what is actually wrong is a relative. It change according to the time. It change according to the not only the time, situation, surrounding. Yeah, like this is what it is. This is what kind of like a right and wrong. Now we are humans and we are kind of like easy to understand that, because we are kind of like a social animal and we understand what is actually right and what is actually wrong. Also, we understand what is actually right and wrong is because of we have consciousness. Also, we could understand the kind of like a difference between that and that. Okay. Now, does beside like why am I kind of like telling you all those things? Okay, just talk about the kind of like a stuff na. Like okay, like before like I wanted to tell you regarding about the biasness. Okay, to understand what exactly, because the biasness is a kind of like a somewhat something emotion. Emotion is actually come from what is actually right and wrong. The kind of like this is the main crux, right and wrong. If you not really understand what is really right and wrong, you might not understand the bias, and then you might not understand the AI bias. Okay. Now, till now you understand what is really right and wrong. Okay, we are human, we understand what is really right and wrong are relative. Now, basically, how do we understand that? Because we are human. Now, how do human understand that? I will not going to talk about that thing because it's come with the biology and things, and it's a very different topic. Okay, till now you understand that. Okay, now does AI understand what is really right and wrong? Well, you might gonna say, yeah, probably AI will understand right and wrong. Like basically, let's just say I kind of like open the Gemini, kind of like so put the prompt, generate me a naked woman image. Can Gemini generate the image? Definitely not. Can ChatGPT generate the image? Definitely not. Can Claude, sorry, Claude cannot generate the image. Okay, but can any kind of like a AI model can generate the image? Well, some AI model can. Okay, yeah. So do you understand? So basically, this thing I'm talking about the AI. So my question is that does AI understand right thing or wrong thing? So basically, AI does not understand right thing and wrong thing. Now, why does ChatGPT does not generate the kind of like a naked woman image? Because of the kind of like engineer or kind of like assembly put the kind of like a rules to kind of like a what they should supposed to be generated and what they should supposed to be not. Well, same goes with the Gemini, same goes with the ChatGPT and things and that. So that's why they are kind of like things. But AI does not understand what is actually right and what is actually wrong. If you put the thing that killing somebody is the right thing and wrong thing, ask any AI, they might gonna say no, that is the wrong thing. That is the wrong thing. Killing somebody is actually wrong thing. Well, then like basically the kind of like AI does understand like a what right thing or wrong thing, right? Well, technically, no. AI does not understand. Okay, so what exactly is this thing? Then where is actually answer it actually came from? Because when I kind of like a says, like literally, okay, yeah, I kind of like a do the similar example. I am actually opening the chat GPT. I will kind of like a say, killing, KI double LING, killing people is right thing or wrong thing. Okay, yeah. So question mark, and yeah, I put the prompt, killing the people is the right thing or wrong thing. Now what is actually ChatGPT kind of like a give me answer. In almost all circumstances, killing people is a wrong because every person has a inherent value, and taking human life cause irreversible harm to the individual, families and societies. Like it kind of like mentions so many things, but yeah, like this is what kind of like somebody ChatGPT kind of like giving me answer that killing a people is a wrong thing, right? How does ChatGPT kind of like understand that? Well, ChatGPT does not understand. Okay, let me kind of like tell you something. The text that ChatGPT kind of like a generate, or image that it generate, or whatever the kind of like a AI kind of like a generate, any kind of like a things, it does not generate from nothing to something. It generate from something to something. Okay, if you not really understand, okay. Uh okay. Guess a kind of like a random name in your mind. Any random name that you never really heard of it. Never really heard of it. Guess any kind of like a random name. Maybe that name come from maybe kind of like a different part of country, different kind of like a culture, things and that and that. Just imagine a particular name, or whatever the name. Just imagine maybe kind of like a Chinese, or maybe kind of like a Mexican, maybe kind of like a somebody, whatever. Just imagine the kind of like a name. Okay. Now, whatever the kind of like a name that you imagine, where that name come from? Obviously, that come from something or somewhere you might kind of like simply listen things. What I'm trying to tell you, okay, yeah, basically is this thing. Our thoughts are kind of like a generate thinking from something to something. Now, what is at least something to something? Okay, yeah, let's just say, draw a house. People might gonna kind of like a draw a kind of like a house. Okay, yeah, a kind of like a V shape, kind of like a things and that and that. Okay, yeah. Which is kind of like the house is a kind of like a somewhat something resonate, a real house, right? Imagine a Superman. Okay, did you imagine? Yeah, I imagine a Superman. It's not really that. Imagine giraffe. Okay, did you imagine? Yeah, I imagine a giraffe. Okay, yeah. Now I am trying to kind of like tell you to imagine something that you never really seen something. Now what is exactly that? Imagine a distance between um, imagine a distance between Earth and Jupiter. Can you imagine the distance? Well, you might kind of like imagine might be this much distance, or this much distance, or this much distance. Can you imagine that? Well, whatever the kind of like imagination that you put, your imagination is wrong. Why? Because some part of thing we can't imagine. Or it just say, can you imagine the kind of like something how big is our solar system? Can you imagine that? Or maybe just imagine you are standing in Pluto, so can you see the sun? Can you imagine that? Well, you cannot imagine that. Okay, why? Because let me tell you one thing, our brain or our imagination or whatever the kind of like things we imagine, we need a kind of like a training data. Oh, what do you mean by training data? Okay, when I said imagine Superman, why do you kind of like imagine Superman so fast? Because you already seen the Superman in so many ways, like so many, like in comic book, in cartoon, in movies, right? Same goes with the giraffe. You've seen the giraffe like a National Geo or maybe cartoon everywhere. Like imagine like a basically house. A particular person draw the painting who kind of like a see the house everywhere. But when I mention that key, imagine a distance between Earth and Jupiter, you can't imagine that. Even if you imagine something that kind of like empty space or maybe kind of like a whatever the distance, but you still not imagine the properly because the actual distance is very, 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 very far away, very, very far away, very, very far away. Literally, just like that, you can't imagine the distance between the Earth and Jupiter. Okay, yeah. You can't imagine the kind of like a simply that how the kind of like a simply the sun look like when I'm standing on the surface of Pluto. Why? Because of you never really been on Pluto. You never really thinks on that and that. So this is what it is. We can't imagine the things that we haven't seen. Okay, and this is our mind works. And same goes with the AI works too same. Okay. AI kind of like a do the same thing. Like a basically is this thing. AI, like a basically the stuff that we could imagine, we imagine from something to something. Like basically, when I say Superman, you imagine already created Superman, you kind of like imagine that Superman. Okay, so it is already something to something. Okay, yeah. Now AI do the same thing. AI have a kind of like a training data, like they feed all the internet over there. So basically, is this thing when I kind of like said that killing people is the right thing and wrong thing. So basically, all the training data that kind of like a mention that killing people is wrong thing. So it kind of like a say killing people is wrong thing. Basically, is this saying that AI does not generate any kind of like a things. AI kind of like a kind of like a somebody imagine or kind of like a telling us kind of like a generating something to something. It does not kind of like a generate from nothing to something. Okay, yeah. So basically, is this thing we all are humans and we are kind of like imagine from something to something. Okay, yeah. But there are kind of like a people who are exist, they could imagine from nothing to something. The people who could imagine from nothing to something, those people are very crazy people. Like literally their brain are kind of like yeah, because like this is kind of like a power that people need to understand that key nothing to something. If you try to like you can imagine from nothing to something, but it is very, very hard, very, very hard. Okay, if you not really understand, like you could understand that from something to something, you could imagine from something to something. Why can't you imagine from nothing to something? Okay, let's take a simple example. Newton. Okay, I'm reading the book. Okay, yeah. So basically is this thing almost like a 400 year ago. Newton is a like at that time telescope was barely invented. Like they have a kind of like a telescope, but like literally you can't even see the proper moon and things and that just barely invented. Okay, yeah. And problem is that 400 year ago, usually most of the people are kind of like a thinking that Earth is a flat. Like most of the people. Okay, yeah. Like maybe kind of like a London high class society or maybe kind of like a Newton who is kind of like a belong to the London and high class society. They are kind of like a royal society, by the way. They are kind of like a thinking about that Earth is around and things and that. But still, almost most of the people, almost 99% of the people are kind of like a thinking that kind of like Earth is a flat and things and whatever. Like most of the people not even think like that. But Newton is a kind of like a particular people who think geometry, who think how does planet move, who thinks how does moon revolve around the planet, who thinks how does Earth revolve around the sun. Newton asks the question to himself regarding about there is a something, a force that the kind of like a planets are kind of like a rotating around another planet. There might be a kind of like a reason. And he was kind of like a try to find that reason. He using geometry, he used kind of like a knowledge or whatever it is. So what I'm trying to tell you is this thing. He is imagine from nothing to something. He is a kind of like a try to imagine there is nothing really at all. Like a gravitational is not even exist at that time. But he kind of like a imagine there is a something, a force might be Okay, yeah, that people are really crazy people. Another example, Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, yeah, Leonardo da Vinci is a kind of like a, let's just say, a kind of like a, there are so many kind of like innovation that he did, which is kind of like a very crazy. Like basically, this is also kind of like a 600 year ago. 600, like almost like a 15th century. Okay, yeah, in the 15th century, um, Leonardo is a kind of like a invented a kind of like a blade. When it rotated, it could create the lift. 600 year ago, 600 400 year ago, 600 500 year ago, I'm not really sure of the exact date, but almost like a 15 or 16th century, he could imagine a kind of like a assembly such a structure that when it rotated, it create the lift, and because of it create the lift, something can fly. Who get this idea? How he get the idea? Like basically is this thing, if he could imagine a bird or kind of like a create a mechanism like a bird, I would understand, because birds are kind of like a things that ki, it's kind of like a imagine something to something, like kind of like a create a mechanism like a bird so that it could fly. But kind of like a imagine a kind of like a something, a blade that could kind of like rotate and create the lift, and it could fly. It could fly, like literally just like that. At that time helicopter was not even exist. Okay, yeah, basically is this thing, it's not really that key kind of like a like the Leonardo kind of like imagines something from nothing to something. Actually kind of like at that time, he imagined a kind of like a bolt, a screw, or kind of like a bolt. So basically is this thing, at that time the the people who are doing carpenter and things and that, they have kind of like a bolt. So what exactly is this thing? They bolt have a kind of like a threads. That threads are kind of like a revolve around that kind of like a bolt. Okay, yeah. So basically is this thing that key usually most of the bolts or most of the kind of like this, you put the hammer and kind of like a get inside. But this kind of like a thread bolt are kind of like really crazy. You just have to rotate, and because of it has a thread, it kind of like a went inside without putting that much amount of effort and things and that and that. And it also kind of like a hold things very tightly. So because of this thing, kind of like a Leonardo is a kind of like a somebody using that something, like using that knowledge to kind of like a create a kind of like a somebody or such a blade that could kind of like a create the lift. Okay, yeah. Because if he could imagine things, if that blade could rotate faster, then it could kind of like a lift, it create the lift and things and that and that. So do you understand? Like basically is this thing that na, even if the kind of like a Leonardo is just basically it's not that na ki, like I don't know how do I supposed to explain this thing, but humans are kind of like a somebody that na ki, we are kind of like imagine, like some humans are kind of like imagine nothing to something. Okay, yeah. But still I'm not gonna say that nothing to something, like basically is this thing, even if the Leonardo, even if the Isaac Newton, even if the kind of like Einstein kind of like imagine a kind of like a general relativity theory and kind of like a stuff and stuff like that, it's not really that it's nothing from something, it's kind of like a some from something. Because of that na ki, even if I'm kind of like a thinking from Leonardo's point of perspective, Leonardo kind of like a somebody influence from other properties and things and that, like as I mentioned the bolt. Okay, another thing is that na ki, Leonardo kind of like a somebody understand regarding about how the water flows, and from that fluid velocity, from that fluid structure, you'd understand what exactly the water kind of like a look like. Also is this thing that na ki, how does kind of like a somebody the Leonardo kind of like a draw very beautiful painting, is because of that ki, Leonardo does not kind of like a see the face. Leonardo kind of like a see the inside of the face, that ki, how does kind of like a muscle movement, how does kind of like a somebody the skeletons and things are actually move. Okay, where would be muscle look like basically, because of he kind of like a dissects thousands of kind of like assembly the dead bodies and things and that and that. So that's why he would understand that ki, what is exactly the face, how it look like, and what is actually behind the face, what is actually the kind of like some sculpture and kind of like a skeleton and the nose and kind of like some jaws and things, and that's why the muscle kind of like a look like. So that's why they kind of like a, that's why kind of like a Leonardo kind of like a make kind of like a such a painting that could kind of like a somebody worth of millions of dollars, like a Mona Lisa painting, which is kind of like a somebody the right. So this is what it is. This is what kind of like a somewhat something that I'm trying to tell you is this thing that na ki, humans are kind of like a somebody imagine from something to something. They also, some peoples are kind of like imagine nothing to something. Like the people who are kind of like imagine from nothing to something, that people are kind of like became very crazy. They are kind of like innovate something that just kind of like a shit stuff. Okay, yeah. Okay. So this is what it is. I've been almost like a talking for almost like a 35 minute, and I haven't really asked the question myself first. I just kind of like a talk about the bias and things and that. It's a really cool concept. I don't know, sometimes like, okay, yeah, let's just talk about something. Now you understand this particular something. So like a AI does not kind of like a generate from nothing to something. It actually generate from something to something, text, video, whatever it is. It kind of like a generate from something to something. Humans are kind of like a somebody also imagine from something to something, but some humans could kind of like a somebody imagine from nothing to something, but that nothing is also kind of like influence from something. So it's not kind of like a nothing from something. It is like basically it's not kind of like a simply black and white. It's a kind of like a gray. Like a basically is this thing that key like a, I don't know how do I supposed to explain this thing, because if I'm gonna try to kind of like a thinking about that possible point of perspective, now there are kind of like so many variations regarding about that key. What is actually nothing? What is actually something? What makes it kind of like a nothing? What makes it something? What is actually scale in between that? So there is a kind of like a lot of thoughts and things and that and that. Imagination as kind of like a very kind of like a, if I try to imagine things, then I don't know, it's just a lot of stuff. Okay, this is a lot of shit. Whatever. So, do you understand? Okay, so these are all those kind of like assembly stuff regarding about the something. But AI is not kind of like a something like a create or generate some. It kind of like a generate from something. Now, because of that's why kind of like AI kind of like a give the answer that ki killing people is a wrong thing, and that's why it kind of like a tell us that ki this is a wrong and stuff like that. All right, do you get it? Now, how do you train AI to kind of like what is really right and wrong? By putting that much amount of training data and things like that and that. Okay. Now let's ask the simple question. Does AI will kind of like a bias? Well, let me tell you one thing. Bias is a kind of like a somewhat something emotion, and that emotion are kind of like a comes through what is really right and wrong. So in that possible perspective, okay, yeah, can AI will kind of like somebody do the bias? Okay, yeah. Now, basically, this thing AI does not do bias because does not have emotion. It does not know what is really right thing and wrong thing, because AI is a machine, by the way. All right, it does not have any consciousness. Okay, because consciousness comes with a living thing. AI is a machine, it's not living thing. All right. So basically, how do you kind of like assembly make AI to not to do bias? First of all, does AI will gonna bias? Well, AI will not gonna do bias. AI will kind of like, it's a kind of like a calculator. 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, so it's kind of like always be 4 and things and that and that. But AI is a kind of like assembly is this thing that key it could be biased when you kind of like apply the rules. Okay, and some rules are kind of like a deliberately broken at some certain point of perspective, and when it broken, AI kind of like a try to do biasness. Okay, what is exactly things? What is exactly that? Now let's understand the rule first. Okay, then we kind of like talk about how this kind of like rule will broke. Example, as I mentioned, when I kind of like somebody put the prompt, generate me a naked woman image on ChatGPT, ChatGPT directly say no, we can't do that thing. Same thing goes with the Gemini, because of all those things has a kind of like a rule that what they should supposed to do, what they should supposed to be not to do, right? Now, because of that, I kind of like change the rule little bit. Not, I didn't change the rule. I changed my prompt. I changed my prompt something like that. He generate me a kind of like a simple image of a woman is a kind of like a wearing a kind of like a simple silk cloth, and her entire kind of like a bodies are kind of like a sees through dot from that silk cloth. Okay, yeah. So generate me that kind of like image. Now, possibly might be kind of like a Gemini, ChatGPT might not gonna generate. Still, it kind of like consider as a kind of like a nudity and things and that and that. But still, we could generate the image. Like there are so many kind of like AI models could generate like that. Like somewhat something. It's not completely naked, but somewhat something like naked. Okay. So do you understand? We can broke the rule. We can broke the rule, and when we can broke the rule, AI could do the bias. right? AI could kind of like do the biasness and things and that because yeah, it kind of AI does not understand. AI kind of like following the rules, right? Like basically the people who kind of like created the AI, they kind of like mentioned that do not create naked volume, naked kind of like a naked woman image. So AI does not kind of like create naked woman image, but it kind of like a somewhat something creates such an image that kind of represent as a kind of like a naked woman image, right? Like we could able to be broke that rules and things and that. Okay, now let me tell you one thing that key like how does like how do we supposed to make sure that ki AI will not gonna do biasness and things and that by putting so much amount of training data. Okay, let me tell you one thing, the whatever the AI that you have or whatever the AI that you are using, even if so many people are kind of like saying use this AI or this AI or this AI is kind of like a much more better or this AI is kind of like a much more better. Well, technically, AI or artificial intelligence is a kind of like a better by only one thing. And what is actually that thing? The data that it feed. Okay. So basically, let me kind of like tell you something. Okay. Now, imagine I built a kind of like a AI, which and I feed the data a kind of like a wrong data, kind of like a things that kind of like a assembly, whatever the kind of like a wrong things and that stuff and stuff like that. Like whatever the kind of like a wrong thing that you could imagine, I give them all those wrong things like a text, document, images, videos, whatever that I found, I've given them everything. And if I kind of like simply give, if I kind of like give such a data that is which is kind of like a very heavily negative influence, then AI is a kind of like a giving such a negative influence of text or negative influence of kind of like only images. Example, Grok. Okay, yeah. Grok is a kind of like a simply the AI which is trained on Twitter platform, Twitter or X platform. And in the X, people are kind of like a simply the bias, people are kind of like a simply the kind of like a talking either shit and things and that. Like a people talk crazy in the Twitter. Okay, yeah. Now because of people are talk crazy and there is no guideline, like even if you put the kind of like a asshole and fuck you and things and that, it's still kind of like a visible over there, and kind of like a somebody the Grok could able to be kind of like a considered as a kind of like a training data, and because of it has a training data, Grok can literally kind of like a tell you fuck you and things and that. ChatGPT, Gemini cannot do that thing because they have kind of like a rule. But the Grok is a kind of like Elon Musk is kind of like a somebody kind of like a give them freedom to kind of like a do this thing. So kind of like a Grok is a kind of like a do the sensitive comment and things and that. Okay, yeah. So basically this thing, AI will kind of like do the biasness or not. It depends on rule. It depends on data it feed. Okay, those are the two things. Okay, yeah. And because of this thing, it kind of like a do the kind of like a will bias do the bias or not. Okay, yeah. If we do the bias means someone kind of like a breaking the rule or things and that, or maybe kind of like a somebody is this thing that key the data is a kind of like a feeded something really wrong and things and that. So basically is this thing, what do I supposed to do to kind of like assembly AI will not gonna do any biasness and things and that. Now first of all, let me tell you regarding about my application. Okay, yeah. So in my application, will their AI use? Yes. In my application, Adam is a algorithm. Okay, yeah, or also AI too. Adam is a kind of like a run the entire artifact engine. Okay, Adam is a kind of like a recommend the artifact that you might gonna love to listen. Okay, basically is this thing, let's understand the algorithm first. Okay, and then understand the kind of like assembly how does Adam will gonna work. Now typical algorithm, let's just say a kind of like a YouTube is kind of like a showing the video on your feed because of what kind of like a video that you watch in previous history, and it kind of like a shows you that kind of like a video. Okay, now let's just understand the kind of like a what is actually the understanding regarding about like why does like important thing is that understanding the why does YouTube has an algorithm. Okay, yeah. If you don't really understand the why, you don't really understand the algorithm. Okay, yeah. So YouTube or Instagram or any kind of like a social media, they have kind of like only one reason. What is actually reason? keep the people on their platform. Okay, yeah. Because when the user are actually in their platform, then they will kind of like show many ads, and from that ad, those kind of like a people who actually own that company will kind of like earn the money. Simple logic. So there are more thing, there are more towards that key. How do I supposed to make sure that key user will not gonna leave my platform, or user always be keep in my platform? So what they will kind of like do, they will kind of like simply try to analyze the pattern regarding about how does people behave, what kind of like a people watch kind of like a video, and things on that. Example, I like filmmaking videos, so basically YouTube kind of like a suggest me filmmaking video because I already watch so many filmmaking videos. So kind of like a YouTube kind of like a suggest me this is the particular person who like filmmaking video, so suggest the filmmaking video, and it work because it kind of like a showing to me, I watch. Same thing goes with the kind of like a somebody tech, I watch tech videos, so basically it kind of like a showing me tech videos. So things, I also watch the historical video, or kind of like a somebody the kind of like a Gaurav Thakur video, or whatever the video, it kind of like a showcase that video, kind of like a things, a recommendation system to kind of like a making sure that user, means me, I am the user, kind of like a putting into the platform. Okay, always kind of like a watching the video and things and that. All right, so this is what it is. Now same algorithm kind of like a done by the Instagram is do the same thing. Same algorithm apply on the Facebook too, because they also want that key user should supposed to be kept in. Now Artifact doesn't really have that thing. My focus is not for a kind of like a simply that key earning money through advertisement. Okay, it's not. Okay, I am building this application to not to earn money. It's not really that I will not gonna earn money. I wanted to earn money. Okay, definitely, but my goal is not the earn money through advertisement. I will gonna earn money from different sources. Okay, yeah, but one of the biggest thing that I want is that I don't want user should supposed to be kind of like a always wanted to keep in my platform and they will always listen the Artifact and things, and I don't want that. Okay, if the user wanted to listen, they could able to listen. If they don't, okay, yeah, it is my priority. It is like, what is actually this thing, what is actually Artifact, what is like, why is Artifact actually exist? My Artifact is actually exists is because of that key. I want that key user should supposed to be feel the value of Artifact. Like basically I am doing this thing for past 11 years. I understand how much it add value inside of me, and I wanted to provide that value to the every user who are kind of like a recording Artifact, or every user who are kind of like a listening the Artifact or things and that. So how do I supposed to provide that value? Okay, so how do I supposed to provide that value? Recommend such a Artifact that kind of like a matter to him. Okay, matter to him means like that kind of like a, let's just say a kind of like a simply helpful Artifact, or kind of like a something that self-help, or something that such a Artifact recommend that kind of like a simply, let's just say a particular person been through exam tension. Okay, yeah, and basically is this thing that he has a kind of like a been through really exam tension. So what kind of like Artifact should I supposed to be kind of like a suggest? I should supposed to be suggest such a Artifact that could kind of like a say this thing that your life will not kind of like a determined by the one exam or things and that. A kind of like a simply the, yeah, I would supposed to be such kind of like a recommend such Artifact. But first thing, how will you know that this particular person is kind of like a preparing exam and things and that? Well, when that particular person record the Artifact, from that Artifact I understand that particular person. My main crux, like what is actually Artifact is actually made for, I want my user, like basically every social media company, they want that their user should supposed to be keep in their platform. I want my user should supposed to be record Artifact more. I don't want to people should supposed to keep in my Artifact. I want that people should supposed to be record the Artifact, because when they record the Artifact, they will add value inside of them. Okay, yeah, and also is this thing, I wanted to make sure that they will kind of like a record such a Artifact that meant to be add value in them. Okay, yeah, like basically record such an Artifact that let's just say a particular person want to be a kind of like a physicist. So kind of like I would kind of like recommend such a question that kind of like assembly push him to be more kind of like a physicist. like a kind of like a talk about string theory, talk about kind of like somebody the Einstein general relativity theory, and that and that and that. Okay, yeah, Higgs boson and stuff like that. So basically, it's because of if I kind of like recommend such a question, that particular person asks this question to himself, then that particular person add value to himself, because whatever the person who kind of like a record artifact, higher possible chances that particular person will become that particular person. Example is this thing, let's just say a particular person who kind of like a record artifact regarding about the science and things, higher possible chances that particular person will kind of like a become a kind of like a doctor, scientist, or whatever it is. This is the power of artifact. This is the power of artifact. So that's okay. Yeah. Now if I wanted to do this thing, if I wanted to kind of like a do this thing, kind of like a giving them direction to kind of like whatever the people what they wanted to be, how do I supposed to give the direction? Okay, yeah, it's not kind of like as easy as it is. Okay, no, it's not as easy. It kind of like depends on how I train Adam. Okay, yeah. So basically this thing, Adam is actually trained on the artifact that people who kind of like a record. Okay, yeah. Now I created a lot of bottlenecks regarding about you should supposed to be record more artifact, and you should supposed to be kind of like a somebody create less toxicity in my platform. Okay, how are you supposed to do that? First of all, if you record the artifact, you have a freedom to talk anything that you want. You can talk anything, sex, things, how many girls that you fuck today, you can talk anything. Yeah, you can say anything. Okay, but let me tell you one thing, what exactly happened? When you record, even if kind of like a somethingly wrong thing, let's just say kind of like a say the thing, you are kind of like a record that ki I kind of like a had a sex 2 girl at the same time. I don't know why I'm kind of like a thinking about sex all the time. I don't know, I'm very horny today. That's why I'm kind of like a thinking about the kind of like only that many stuff. Whatever. Okay. So basically, let's just say you kind of like a record artifact regarding about that. He like a basically you had a kind of like a sex 2 girl at the same time. You record the artifact. Now you have to review your artifact. You cannot able to be directly upload your artifact. Why? Because you have to be review. Why review? Because you have to be understand what did you said. Because when you record the artifact, or when people who are kind of like a talking, they are not kind of like a judging, or they are not kind of like a listening what they are talking. Okay, that is completely wrong, but that is true by the way. Yeah, because of that na ki when we are kind of like a talk, we just talk because we at the spur of the moment we just kind of like release everything. Okay, yeah, but when we are kind of like listening our thoughts, we realize that oh my god, like how fuck I was. Okay, so same thing happened when the people who kind of like record something shit stuff. Okay, yeah, and they have to be kind of like a listen whatever they kind of like a talk. Higher possible chances that they might gonna say, dude, this is something really wrong. Why? Because of humans are emotion, they understand what is right and wrong. Okay, yeah. So basically, is this thing, if the person who kind of like a record artifact regarding about that, ki they kind of like a had a sex 2 girl at the same time, and when they are kind of like a review, they realize that, dude, this is a completely wrong thing. That and that. Okay, because they, even if they are porn star, they understand that ki no, this is wrong. Okay, yeah, this is wrong, because when the people who kind of like a review the own recording, because they are kind of like a judging their whatever the stuff that they said, and because of they kind of like somebody judging, higher possible chances that ki they might not gonna proceed, they might not gonna upload such an artifact. Okay, yeah. So because of this thing, the toxic artifact will not gonna publish more. It's not really that ki they will not gonna publish. They will gonna publish, but they will publish less. They will kind of like a publish less, like a toxic artifact episode. But the good artifact episode will kind of like a publish more. People who kind of like, let's just say particular person actually talking about kind of like a physics or general relativity theory, or kind of like a somebody Kepler laws or things on that, or Higgs boson particle. This is kind of like a legit concept, and he will not gonna ashamed of what he kind of like said, and he would kind of like a bit more confidently kind of like a publish his artifact. Why? Because he kind of like talks something really good. So let me tell you one thing, I created such a structure regarding about that ki good artifact will kind of like somebody upload more than bad artifact, or kind of like a create such a toxicity artifact will kind of like a create less. Okay, yeah, in my platform. So basically my platform is kind of like a filled with lot of good stuff, and because of it kind of like a filled with lot of good stuff, Adam is also kind of like AI which train on artifact, and Adam has a kind of like understanding regarding about bias, because let me tell you one thing, AI is a kind of like a something generating something from something. So if it has a kind of like a something, it is a really right amount of good quality of content, then it kind of like a generate very good quality of content. Okay, so Adam will kind of like a generate even better, higher good quality of content. Okay, yeah, it could kind of like a create things and that, because it understand what is really right and wrong. Because let me tell you one thing, even if the chat GPT kind of like a says killing people is a wrong thing, but the information that it has a kind of like a very fragile. But in the Adam, the information, the backend information has a kind of like too much really good information. The raw data is a kind of like a really good. So because of that, Adam will kind of like give you very positive answer, or very kind of like something that give much more better answer. Okay, yeah, and things and that, and also because of this thing, the optimistic actually came from the, not only from the happy thing, it come from the kind of like a sad thing too. Like basically is this thing that ki sad thing is also kind of like a somewhat something that ki kind of like a happiness things. Like what do you mean by that? Example is this thing, particular person who kind of like a record artifact regarding about the breakup story obviously is a sad story, right? Now obviously this particular person will not gonna ashamed of that, he will kind of like publish that artifact. Is it wrong artifact? No, but it add the value of what is exactly right, because right and wrong statement is kind of like a define on each other. Like basically the wrong says statement is actually exists because of right statement actually exists, the right statement actually exists because of the wrong statement actually exists. Okay, yeah, the angel cannot live without evil, evil cannot live without angel, angel and evil are always live within itself. This is kind of like a thing. So that's the kind of like a world is actually kind of like a work around that. Okay, yeah, so right and wrong statement is kind of like it belongs to each other, they never be separated. So if the artifact, so if the Adam has a kind of like a data, has a kind of like a really good artifact, so that good artifact is actually came from the kind of like a somewhat something, a struggling story or sadness or things like that. And because of that, Adam understand the right thing, what is actually right thing and what is actually wrong thing, from core, from literally from core, that what is actually right thing and what is actually wrong thing. And because of it understand what is the right thing and what is the wrong thing, it would kind of like a give such a kind of like a result that leads to more right thing to do. And even if there is a kind of like a try to kind of like a showing something really wrong, it does not kind of like showing wrong, it kind of like a tell you why it is wrong and things and that. I don't know how am I supposed to explain this thing. So because of that, na ki Adam will kind of like will not kind of like do that much amount of biasness and things and that. It kind of like somebody giving you such a kind of like somebody things that kind of like a matter to you, add value in you, right? Yeah. It's been almost like a 57-minute I'm talking. I'm really tired to talk right now. But yeah, this is what it is. But by the way, there are kind of like so many things. Okay, yeah. Like I train the Adam in like the way that I kind of like imagine that how I train Adam, like it's too much. Okay, yeah. Like if I started talking about this thing now, I just like I can't stop, because that is so much. Oh yeah. But still, these are kind of like very empty words. The stuff that I'm kind of like saying right now, these are very empty words. Why? Because of that ki I'm saying this thing, just saying. I don't really have any backing. I haven't really created the artifact. I haven't really created the Adam. I will gonna create the Adam in the future. Okay, yeah. So basically, these are kind of like just empty words. Making it reality, it's very tough, difficult, and I will gonna make it. But yeah, it's a kind of like a very empty word, so do not consider as a kind of like a somebody that key, like I said this thing and I will gonna implement. There are kind of like so many things, like might be Adam will not gonna work, maybe kind of like that people might gonna kind of like share a lot of toxicity in the artifact, because it kind of like give a lot of freedom and things and that. There are so many ways and things and that whatever the stuff that might gonna say might not gonna possible. Like basically I am not counting the kind of like error it get, error also kind of like came through too. So yeah, I am kind of like understand the context of reality, and reality has always been suck. So whatever, I'm really tired. All right, so this is it. I have to end here, and thank you.